Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day. Microphone check, 1, 2. XCC, hello and welcome. XCC, hello and welcome.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. There we go, rolling.
For me, documentary it's the most fascinating and challenging art form in the moving image medium there is. And you know, I've been in love with it all my life. I think as an editor, specifically as a documentary editor, you are designing the narrative. You are choosing the order, the structure, way more. All that stuff in drama is done by a screenwriter sometimes years before. All that stuff is pretty much locked. Yeah, you can do some stuff in the edit suite afterwards, but not a massive amount. You're a blank canvas in a documentary edit. You're tabula rasa, day one.
Hello and welcome to The Documentary Life, a show that sets out to inspire and inform you on how to best live and lead your own documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 48. And it is brought to you by Barong Films, proud creators of documentary film, the Documentary Life podcast, and the Documentary Academy, our industry-changing A to Z documentary filmmaking program that will transform you into the documentary filmmaker that you've always wanted to be. Find out more at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. Back in around 2002, I first began working with nonlinear editing. I believe it was one of the earliest versions of Final Cut Pro, maybe version 2 or 3. For anyone born after, 1990, nonlinear or really computer-based editing is how it's always been for you. The idea of tape-based machines or film flatbeds, was an archaic or maybe worse, a kitschy kind of way of cutting one's film. All through the 90s, including at TV news stations, I was editing on Beta SP tape machines. And anyone who came upon these or the older 3/4-inch machines remembers shuttling back and forth through footage with an actual shuttle control, as opposed to the J, K, and L and spacebar keys of your computer keyboard. Anyhow, when I first got my hands on some video editing software, to say that it rocked my world, that would be a vast, vast understatement. I'd very briefly touched a few keys of an early version of Avid Media Composer a few years prior, but when I sat down with Final Cut to learn the software, I was quickly and completely won over. Now, it's funny that I mentioned learning the software when I'm talking about editing, because I didn't learn editing per se by using Final Cut. Not at all. I was really having to learn the software more than anything else. Like I said, I'd been editing for a while, actually since probably 1990, when I was first taking video courses at the State University of New York College at Fredonia, where I went for my undergrad degree. I'd taken many filmmaking theory and hands-on based programs there. I'd studied film and filmmaking techniques, some of which, of course, included editing and post-production. But, of course, it wasn't really until I sat down with a bigger project on my hands and immersed myself in weeks of editing on a feature-length high 8 video movie, if you can believe that I made with colleagues during my senior year at uni. It wasn't until then that I actually learned how to edit, or at least what I believed to be editing at that time. Fast forward to, like I said, I think circa 2002, when I shot my first digital feature and was putting it together in Final Cut. Or you could fast forward even a couple more years, where I was hired to edit on my first documentary feature. all this time I'm using Final Cut Pro. And I was learning the software, which was an amazingly complex, deeply, honed piece of software that even though I'd end up using for a decade until Apple let me down, but that's of course another story, I probably would really only understand and use about 15% of the actual software. But that was all that I needed to know to be able to edit videos, to edit films. And as I mentioned, I didn't really learn how to edit per se using any kind of editing software. Other than a class or two where I was forced to use the editing base at school, I really taught myself how to edit. And I read books on editing. Obviously, Walter Murch's In the Blink of an Eye was like a Bible for editing people. Another great one that I would come across was a book afterwards called Conversations that Murch did with famous novelist Michael Ondaatje. You might remember his name from I think it was The English Patient was an early novel. I devoured these types of books and I watched a ton of films with an eye specifically on editing. Why, you ask? Well, there was something absolutely transforming and magical for me. And really, this is probably too light of descriptive words that I could use, but vocabulary escapes me, honestly, when I finally began to realize the power harvested by this editing position, a position that, to my knowledge, was, and honestly, I believe still is today, probably the most underappreciated, most misunderstood of all of the film positions. Now, if you've done any of your own research on the subject yourself, you've come to realize, as have so many others, that a director is really only as good as his or her editor. A director can have the vision for how a film looks and feels and sounds and can direct talent on a set, but it's in the editing room where it's just an editor and the director's footage that the wizardry really happens. But, as I mentioned, I had to really learn all of this myself. I had to take the time to seek out the information. I had to immerse myself in years of all sorts of footage and work and rework scenes, sometimes whole edits until I could get the scene or the film right. It took years of this kind of work and thought and practice before I could, get to a place where I could really feel comfortable calling myself a film editor in the truest sense of the words. A person who could take someone's footage and lay it all out on a timeline in a coherent, deeply meaningful fashion, told from the perspective of someone who knows what it means to tell a story. Because that's what an editor does. That's what a true editor is. And you know what? No one that I knew of was ever going to teach me that kind of thing. I'm not talking about the technical aspects of editing. There's plenty of that material. Hell, in this day and age, if you have a technical question about, something to do with editing, you can find some snot-nosed kid from Melbourne, Australia on YouTube who can tell you how to set some motion keyframes on a clip. I'm not talking about that at all. That's readily available. I'm talking about the fact that no one could put into words, let alone proper instruction, how one makes a meaningful edit with the kind of cinematic nuances that sets a story apart from just another, sizzle reel of someone's drone footage in Thailand. I often like to use that example. Forgive me for that. I'm talking about learning the language of editing so that you could have a constructive conversation with an otherwise difficult director to work with. I'm talking about having access to professionally shot footage and sound and being able to develop not only a proper editing workflow, but a tightly knit edit that's consistent with professional standards, so as to go out into the marketplace and try and secure yourself a job as an editor. None of that existed to my knowledge. That is, of course, until I recently was made aware of what Paddy Bird was doing with his company Inside the Edit. And I have you, my fellow doc lifers, to thank for this. A couple of you, after hearing my 5 ways to edit more efficiently segment, a piece that I did just a couple of weeks ago for episode 46, a couple of you, after hearing the program, wrote me with your desire for more of this kind of content, content that dealt with the subject of editing. In fact, you even mentioned specifically this course called Inside the Edit, the brainchild of editing vet and documentary filmmaker Paddy Bird. Well, I took this as an obvious opportunity to reach out and perhaps speak with someone who was doing something on the subject of editing that was sitting well with apparently a whole heck of a lot of people. Well, I had no idea of what I was to discover, which was basically the aforementioned class or classes that would properly teach someone from the inside out, teach them the aspects of the process known as editing. After having had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with Paddy to hear his story, his journey from a young sap in the back of a dark room, learning how to edit on one of the first Avids, to becoming a lead editor on some of the biggest reality programs in the UK, to becoming a documentary filmmaker himself, and then finally to spending 3 years of his life researching and developing what has today become one of the most recognizable, if not downright important courses on the editing process today, through his company, Inside the Edit. After nearly 2 hours of incredible conversation, I quickly realized that the 30-minute time slot, that normally is allotted to the conversation with the doc industry guest segment, that was not going to suffice here. So I've decided to forego the first segment as well as the Doc Lifer Community Question of the Week segments this week, so as to make a little bit more room for this amazing conversation that I had with Paddy. It's the show that many of you have been waiting for. So after this quick break, we're going to get right to it. Next up, my conversation with Inside the Edit's Paddy Bird. 2 weeks ago, we announced the Documentary Life Community Facebook group, a place where fellow doc lifers could come to share valuable information, collaborate with other doc filmmakers, and provide others with constructive feedback, advice, and support on documentary-related topics. It's a community where one can feel comfortable sharing the struggles and challenges one faces, because as we know from this podcast, there are most likely many others who have already experienced the same thing in the past, or who are currently experiencing it, or certainly will at some point. It's a community that shares valuable information in a way that can help others and allow members to garner support when they most need it. This community fosters relationships and builds connections and friendships worldwide. One cursory look at the Documentary Life Community Facebook group will tell you all you need to know. There are already dozens of doc lifers like yourself who are taking advantage of this wonderful opportunity to further become a part of the TDL community. To be a part of the Documentary Life Community Facebook group, you can search for the Documentary Life Community Facebook, not page, but group, and apply from there. I will also, be putting a direct link to the page up in the show notes for this episode. If you have any questions or concerns or need help with the Documentary Life Community Facebook group, please don't hesitate to reach out to my wife, the producer of TDL, Stephanie, and her email address is stephanie@barongfilms.com. So do take a moment and check out the Documentary Life Community Facebook group today. After I premiered my first documentary film, Journey to Kathmandu, a film that took nearly 5 years to make, I remember feeling elated and exhausted. Is there any other feeling like the first time you show your completed doc film to an audience? I don't think there is. Not long after, I took a well-deserved short break away from the city, and it was while I was on a hike, when I had reached a mountaintop and was overlooking the Great Columbia River, that I found myself thinking back on the film and the journey that I'd been on. I thought about all the mistakes I'd made, all the wins that I'd had, how it had felt to finally share my film with an audience, and I thought about the life it would have from here on out. And I began to break down all the components of what had gotten me to where I was at that moment, and all the things I wished I'd done differently. And this is how I began to form what I am sharing with you today, a free course entitled The Documentary Filmmaker's Essential Checklist. In the Essential Checklist, I share with you the fundamental aspects of making a documentary film, and perhaps most importantly, help you to avoid making some of the mistakes that I made during my first feature film. It is my sincere hope that the Documentary Filmmaker's Essential Checklist will help make your doc film's journey the truly exhilarating experience that it can and should be. It's yours simply by going to thedocumentarylife.com/courses and enrolling for free. I'm excited to have a conversation today with editing extraordinaire and documentary filmmaker Paddy Bird. Paddy, it's great to have you here on The Documentary Life.
Chris, thank you so much for asking me. I'm really, really, really chuffed. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's really interesting how this whole thing happened. Recently, we've been getting some more feedback from listeners of the show who are ironically, and I say ironically because my background is steeped in editing. Like yourself, I've been an editor for years. But I hadn't
Mm.
really talked about post production a whole heck of a lot here on the show. And I'd been receiving feedback from listeners, and there seemed to be a bit of a need and desire for some of that conversation. And your name actually has come up in some recent emails, and yeah, so I'm super excited to have you aboard to talk really about all things editing today. So thanks for agreeing to do that.
Absolute pleasure.
Patty, how long have you been in editing actually?
I think the first edit I ever remember doing, or the first time I really sort of dove into it very quickly, very in any kind of significant depth, was about 95. So what, 22 years, something like that.
Okay, so 95.
Uh,
Were you editing on 3/4 tape machines? Were you editing film? How were you cutting at that point?
that's an interesting question. Actually, I'm 42.
Yeah.
So the actual most of my generation of my peer group started off on tape,
Right.
but I actually kind of skipped that. I was on the first generation of Avid, so I'm from the
Ah.
first generation of digital. So a lot of people with similar amount of grey hair to me talk about tape
Yes.
this and tape that, and I'm just like, yeah, I didn't do any of that stuff. I'm completely digital. So yeah,
Yeah.
back then an Avid, and there wasn't anything else. An Avid was like
Yeah.
100 grand.
Yeah, exactly. 120 grand machines, totally.
Yeah, yeah, it was, yeah. So it's been over a couple of decades, really. God, it's almost quarter of a century. That makes one think.
Yeah, it certainly does. I've got about 3 more years of gray hair on you, and 90. Let's see, 94 ish was, yeah, 94 is when I got out of college here. Of course, you guys call it university. And I remember at that time, sort of this idea of independent filmmaking started to become a more and more attainable thing. It seemed like, and so whereas you got in sort of just at the beginning in sort of my schooling, I had just missed that beginning. And so I remember, around 95 and 96 becoming increasingly excited about the possibilities that it looked like for independent filmmakers, certainly with digital technology.
So yeah, I mean, I actually started off as a desktop publisher. I was using
Hmm.
Quark Express, if anyone remembers that, and the early days of Photoshop and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And then a friend of mine, who was working in the same department at this magazine we were working, said, "Hey," he showed me a magazine cover, and he said, "Look," and the headline was, "You can now edit films on a computer."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Wow, this is really cool." And we actually went to the our department head in this magazine, and said, "Hey, let's start a film company."
Oh, wow.
So, and it was a charity. So we actually got corporate sponsorship for an Avid.
You've
I
got to
think
be
it was,
kidding me.
yeah, Bloomberg TV
Yeah.
bought us 100 grand Avid.
Wow.
It was completely, you hear some really like painful stories of people who were, they spent years making tea or coffee in an edit facility or a production company. I skipped all of that. I
Oh,
was
yeah.
incredibly lucky. We got the Avid in on a Monday. We had our first client. No, we got the Avid in on a Friday, and on the Monday we had our first client in. So on Saturday and Sunday we were reading the manual, saying,
Unbelievable.
anything about. Same thing with camera and all that kind of stuff. We didn't know what wide shots were, medium shots, cutaways, close. We were reading it 48 hours before and then shooting it, going and doing it. We had no idea what we were doing. Yeah, Bloomberg like amazingly bought us this Avid, and we got corporate sponsorship for a Sony Betacam SP camera, I think.
I was going to
Uh,
ask you what you shot it on.
yeah, it was Betacam Beta SP. Yeah, so
Beta SP. Yeah, right. Okay.
I didn't go to university or film school, or I mean, I didn't really finish school.
Yeah.
And we made hundreds in 2 years. We made hundreds of like corporate videos
Yeah.
and like taking in turns. So we had a little mini film school. We had no one to teach us, and we were just making hundreds. But the thing was is that the two friends I was working with didn't want to edit. So they wanted to direct, they wanted to do camera. So
Yeah.
I was sort of forced into the edit room. And I remember for that first year, I literally locked myself in the edit suite. When I say I lived there, I mean, I went and bought a blow up bed, and I lived in the
Oh,
edit
I
suite.
love it.
Yeah. I was just obsessed with it. When I started
Yeah.
looking at the power of what you could do, and just by changing the structure of the sequence, and I was just obsessed. So that's how it started. And we did that for a couple of years, and then bang, I got an agent. We all sort of left and went our separate ways. And I got an agent, a sort of, I think about sort of 97, 98. And
Mm.
then that was it. My career started there.
And so you were locking yourself in a dark room for hours and days and weeks and probably years, and really you just you learned editing by teaching yourself. And I think a lot of people listening to the program can relate to that. And this will be good because at some point when we lead into start talking about what you're doing with inside the edit, we can talk about why and how teaching yourself can be good, but it also can be there's a need for more than just the teaching yourself. So that's great. At what point did you ever hear of the name Walter Murch?
I mean, I'd heard of him loads, because he was a seminal editor in the
Yeah, of
70s and
course. Yeah.
80s. He edited or co-edited Apocalypse Now, which you kind of watch as a 16-year-old boy, and all these films you have a rite of passage to go through like that. And
Yeah.
Goodfellas, grown up, in the mid 70s onwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did hear about him, and I did hear about then he wrote the Blink of an Eye book, which to still now seems to be the only kind of artistic book on editing
Yeah.
that's
Right.
any kind of merit. And then when the whole kind of Final Cut Pro revolution happened, 2004, and he cut
Yes.
Cold Mountain, there was a big thing about it, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah. It's fun. I remember being pretty. There were a couple of books around that time, and you're referencing the sort of Final Cut Pro revolution. I think it might have been I'm sure it was when they came out with their fourth version, and they were calling it Final Cut Pro HD.
Yeah, it was. I think it was version 4.5, and there was a lot of fanfare. And it was like, I think Avid had come down in price from like 100 grand to like 20 by then.
Right.
But then
Right.
Apple came in and went, "Oh yeah, this is £200.
Let's do
$200."
this. Exactly. I remember it well because it was there was definitely a watershed moment for me as a filmmaker, but I at this point I guess I should say as an editor, because we had just come back from spending 6 months in Cambodia, myself and another filmmaker, and we were making a documentary film called Bomb Hunters. And when we came back, he would end up hiring me to edit the film, and I'm sure that you can appreciate this. I would spend the next 4 or 5 months practically like down literally in the basement of his house, kind of in the dark, and just immersing myself with all of that footage that we had spent time with. And it was when I had really first come across In the Blink of an Eye. So of course I devoured that book, and then he had just released a book about his experiences with Apple and doing the digital thing with I think Cold Mountain. Was it Cold Mountain? And
Cold Mountain,
yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Do you consider yourself an editor or a filmmaker?
I mean, that's an interesting question, and it brings up a whole kind of multitude of, kind of interesting sub questions to talk about. I mean, I started off as an editor, and I did about 15 years, and then I kind of stopped and started moving into directing. But I'd done a lot of camera work and stuff like that. I'd say 80% of what I've done is editing. But I consider myself a filmmaker because I did a lot of, I directed quite a few things for British TV as well, and started, because after you've done sort of 15, 20 years in dark room in Soho in central London, you're like, can I have some time off for good behaviour, please? This prison sentence is long enough.
Yes, right.
When you're doing backing, I just wanted to vary it up. I love editing. It's been my life. It's I think it's an amazing art form. I think it's the most complex and nebulous art form in the moving image medium.
Not to mention underrated.
Yeah, everything goes through us. Everything goes through us. Good camera work, bad camera work. Good direction, bad direction. Good performance, bad performance. Good production management, bad production management.
Yes.
Everything gets funneled through the images that we are playing around with on our timeline. And by and large, we get to decide how that narrative is crafted. And this brings up another big question as well. You mentioned Walter Murch and whether you like it or not, and you can have this chat, and no one really talks about this, but documentary editing is the most complex editing genre there is. It's way more complicated than drama because there's no script, there's no pre-visualization. Right. All this, if you think about it, you've got a whole load of everything's been storyboarded and everything's been analyzed. The actors are rehearsing and all this kind of stuff, and there's been dozens and dozens of very talented people putting in all this pre-visualization and going through the production process, and you've got a tightly wrapped script and stuff like that, and that all changes obviously afterwards, but you're still inherently locked into a very tight dramatic structure, which you can only really bend 5, 10, 15, 20% depending on the actual script. I remember doing a podcast myself for our channel with Eddie Hamilton. Eddie Hamilton, he's edited, he's one of the biggest action editors around at the moment. He's edited Kingsman 1 and 2,
wow,
Kick-Ass 1 and 2, X-Men. He's like serious dude. And he came from TV as well. He came from documentaries. And he said the same thing as, documentary is way more complex than that. Because you're finding the story as you go. With a documentary, the director's usually just sitting there and they're trying to find the story. They're responding to stimuli. They're responding to, shooting, and they're responding to characters and asking certain questions in certain ways. And you can have a whole load of interview questions set up for a documentary shoot, and you shoot and you just answer one.
Wow.
And bang, you're to something that you never thought was going to happen. You're going to go down that rabbit hole.
That's right. That's right.
There's so many moving parts, and you actually, as a documentary editor, you have way more power. I've done drama, and I personally, I was like, the thing I always say about documentary editing is it's like, I've done a lot of sort of complex science docs and political docs and historical docs, and I always say that it's like doing a degree in a subject very, very quickly. It's like doing a master's degree in a couple of months. So if you're doing some complicated piece of science or politics or history or whatever it is, or even observational, you've got to read the books and you've got to be au fait with the arguments, because guess what? This is going out to millions of people, and the newspapers are going to be reviewing this and all this kind of stuff. So you got on top of this argument. It's kind of like doing a bit of law, and so you get to know these amazing subjects.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I always chose. Whenever my agent rang me and said, "Oh, we got this," and if something was like, if I knew nothing about a subject and it sounded intriguing, I'm like, wow, yeah, I really want to know.
Let's do that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of documentary filmmaking, period, right? As you get to immerse yourself in a subject that you may know maybe a little bit, maybe nothing about, and you get to understand that subject from the point of view of people who have made maybe their lives, pursuing that subject or having a passion for that particular subject.
Yeah.
And there's really something to be said for being around that energy.
Absolutely. And it's so, yeah, I've done a lot of camera, I've done a lot of directing as well. But I think, as an editor, specifically as a documentary editor, you are designing the narrative of that. You are choosing the order, the structure, way more. All that stuff in drama is done by a screenwriter sometimes years before, all that stuff is pretty much locked. Yeah, you can do some stuff in the edits afterwards, but not a massive amount. You're a blank canvas in a documentary edit. You're tabula rasa day one, and you give 10 documentary editors the same footage, and they will come out with 10 different films, because we all, as creative artists, bring a lot more. We bring different types of baggage to the edit suite. The films we watch, the literature we read, all the things, all the stimuli that we have as an individual artist goes into what we think is important when we look at those raw footage for the first time and start structuring, and the use of music and stuff like that. So yeah, it's for me, documentary it's the most fascinating and challenging art form in the moving image medium there is, and I've been in love with it all my life.
Hey Harry, what do you say we take a break? Come on, we'll go to Al's Transbay. I'll buy you a beer, huh? How about that?
No, I want to finish this.
I thought you turned those tapes in.
Stan, be quiet, will you?
All right.
Do you think we can do this?
Tired of drinking anyhow.
What a stupid conversation.
Stan, please, I'm trying to work.
Tired of mostly everything.
Tired of me?
Tired of you. But not today.
What the hell are they talking about, for Christ's sake?
Stanley, please, I'm trying to get this done.
There's two types of documentary editing. There's cinema documentary editing, or long
TV,
form,
right.
Independent. Then there's television,
Right.
and in television, I come from television. I've done feature docs before. I've done 90-minute, I've done 90-minute docs, but the latitude in style, in content, in tone that you get in truly independent filmmaking is way more than you would ever get in television, because television is run by broadcasters, which are answerable to advertisers and shareholders and So, when you're making even a serious political documentary or something like that, you have you're gonna have the lawyers in from Channel 4 or BBC, or
That's right, right.
At the end, they're like, you can't say that, can't say this, can't say that. You don't. And that's why the internet is so kind of interesting, because you don't have any of that stuff. You can just go and say what you want and do what you want, and there's downsides to that and there's upsides to that.
Yeah.
But in terms of television, you have all kinds of issues that you've got to be aware of, because you're working for a broadcaster, and there's just an intricate web of business that is going on there. So that, in terms of television, I mean, for me, editing is such a nebulous and weird art form. Directing, acting, there's been hundreds of things that what directors do. There's hundreds of books about it. Camera work and DOPs, designing light and all that kind of stuff. And all these things happen in front of lots and lots of people. You go on set, there's dozens of people around, and you can see what's going on. You can see the conversations going on, whether it's camera, whether it's acting, whether it's directing, whether it's producing and stuff like that. But with editing, you don't. No one, very few people that are privileged to go into a dark room and see what that person, that talented artist, that man or woman is doing on an edit suite. It's the black arts of the moving image. It really is.
It is. It really is. I can't tell you how many times I've sat down, and in your editing, in particular, if you're doing something long form, I just seem to, you really, as an editor, you start to develop a relationship with these people on screen. And depending if you were sort of, the shooter or director, if it's a project that you did yourself as a doc filmmaker, or if it's not, especially if it's not, it's very interesting to see sort of the relationship that grows between you and the characters that you're cutting, because you've never maybe even seen them ever or met them in your life, and yet you feel like you know these people. And for me, there's always this really interesting dynamic, later on,
Yeah.
perhaps at a premiere, when maybe I do meet some of these people and I'm like, hey, just so you know, I know you. I've been seeing your face for the past 4 months.
I know you really well.
And they're just like, hey, stranger, nice to meet you too.
Full security.
Paddy, in 2007, you stepped away from editing as a gig. You stepped away for a bit and you started teaching, didn't you?
I did. I mean, I was I had a bit of burnout. I was doing these sort of complex science documentaries back to back, and the choice was I just want to go and sit on a beach for 6 months or something like that and just chill, because you have these complex arguments and all the time, and it's the stress of working on these tight deadlines and stuff. So I thought, I'm going to take some months off. And then my agent said, why don't you go and teach? Because my agency has a training arm as well. And I was like, teach? I know nothing about teaching. They were like, just you're actually teaching software. So all the training centers around the world, they're teaching software. So you can go and teach people Avid or Final Cut. So yeah, I took some time off, and actually they were like, oh, you work like 10 till 5? I don't think I've ever worked 10 till 5 in my entire life.
You're like, you mean 10 a.m. to 5 a.m., right?
Yeah, that's what usually that's what we're all usually used to.
Yeah.
So I had to pass an exam to teach Final Cut Pro and Avid and all that kind of stuff. And actually what I realized was quite funny, that you have to memorize these manuals when you want to teach, because you're essentially teaching a manual. And I realized that I use about 3% of Avid or Final Cut. I had no idea what most of these buttons do.
Isn't that intense?
I use about 9 buttons.
Yep.
It's probably 95% of my day is 9 buttons. You just get into a rhythm. So I think, I did that. I ended up doing it for about 18 months, I think.
Right.
And I ended up teaching. So there was these lot of 3-day courses and 5-day courses. So I did hundreds of these courses, taught quite from around the world, camera operators, editors, assistant editors, directors, people moving from Avid to Final Cut, or people moving from Final Cut to Avid, or, things like that. So yeah, it was a good grounding actually in then what I went on to do inside the edit. I don't think I could have done inside the edit unless I'd have done that sort of year, 18 months of teaching.
So you have now this 18 months of teaching, right? What leads sort of to the decision to go off on your own and create the business that is now Inside the Edit? How did that happen?
Well, I was sort of I moved back into television and did about after that year and a half. And I went back this time I came back, and this time I was mixing it up. I was doing editing and directing.
Okay.
So I was editing, doing like a couple of documentary jobs, maybe some reality TV, but mostly docs. And then I was sort of directing as well, doing a bit of doing docs and stuff like that. But then, I guess what I was doing, it was around the time of the whole kind of 5D revolution.
The DSLR revolution, sure.
The DSLR revolution, sort of, what was it, 2009, 10, 11, all that kind of, and I was ended up doing a lot of my own self shooting. So I would do we have a show over here called Secret Millionaire.
Yes, I know it well via my wife.
Yeah. I think in the States they've got a version called Undercover Boss or something like that.
I think you're right. Yeah. So
I was directing that with a crew, but I bought my own DSLR kit and I wanted to shoot. I shot quite a bit of that as well, as much as, because you're only allowed to shoot like 20%. For British TV, because DSLR at that time was not full front. It wasn't like I think the color space ratio was not right for broadcast. So so I was sort of becoming a one-man band. And I'd done some shows, like I started directing, and then I remember I was actually on Secret Millionaire the first day, because you get a crew on that. It's a major show. 8-9 million people watch that in the UK.
Right.
And it was my first day and directing it. And the camera operator came up to me, and I had, a fairly large crew. And he came up to me and went, "Were you an editor beforehand?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "God, it's such a relief."
Exactly.
It's so nice.
He's like, "Thank you."
It's like, because he's sitting there going, "Oh, should we get a reverse shot for this?" And go and I'm like, I just sort of think, no, we're not going to use that.
We're not going to use it. That's right.
So what would have taken us 4 hours to shoot, you did in 40 minutes. So we can either have a rest or go and shoot something else. So
I remember a moment I had been hired to direct on, they were basically shooting a sizzle reel to try and sell a new reality TV show, which has since been picked up. But I remember being on set and I'm directing, and one of the producers kept kind of chirping in my ear, as producers can often do. And because we're moving setups, and they said a handful of times, "Hey, Chris, should we turn around, or should we get this shot, or did you want to get the wide, or did you want to get, did you want to go closer in on this person?" And each time I would just say, no, we're good. We won't use it. We won't use it. It won't be used. It's fine. That's fine. And at some point, I remember the camera operator turns around to the producer and is like, "Listen, he comes from an editing background. He knows what he's doing. We got it."
He's not going to fucking use any of that shit, man. That's a waste of time.
Exactly.
The whole point about being trained in editing, and we do this a lot in Inside the Edit. I talk about it a lot. It's like, look, if you want to learn one art form that's going to permeate across every single art form, learn editing.
Oh, listen to this. All you listeners, you need to go back and rewind and listen to that again. Never a truer statement has been said, probably on this show.
Yeah. I mean, it's there's a cliche in TV and film: editors make the best directors.
That's
exactly right. So there was a couple of seeds being sown actually throughout the whole. I remember thinking when I was training, I was like, no one is teaching the craft here. Yeah. No one. It's all the buttons. And then you look at the way that the industry is structured, and it's all cameras this and this camera, and it's got to be 2K and 4K and 6K and 8K and 60, and edited 64-bit background rendering, and this button does that, and it's this pull down, and it was just like, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
What I kind of realized was that, what you kind of know in the industry is that, the manufacturers sell to you all of this stuff that you pretty much don't need. Or you can have when you're established in the industry, but you don't need to spend thousands and thousands and thousands on this and that. The whole point about it is we have a lot of people in the industry, and there's more people studying film and television every year than there are in film and television. So it's crazy. So we have loads of people who are really good at operating 4K cameras and grading this and the best this, that, and that. We the industry's full of that kind of stuff. What we very short supply of is people who can tell stories, and the ability to tell stories to a professional level, to keep an audience engaged for 30, 60, 90, 120 minutes. That's what is going to get you employed.
That's right.
Not when you've memorized the manual to this camera or that piece of editing software or this lighting rig or whatever. All that stuff is like secondary.
The technical aspects of doc filmmaking are certainly discussed on this program many times, often. It's a context for which we hold a lot of conversations, and it's important to understand the technical aspects to documentary filmmaking, or how to make a doc film. But that's only a fraction of what it means to be a doc filmmaker.
Less than 5%, less than 3%.
Right? And it's a lot about what you're talking about, and what you do with Inside the Edit is this idea of, I think you guys are introducing this creative theory and process, right?
Yeah, we guarantee you not to teach you one button in the editing software. Like all that stuff is secondary, but the whole way that the industry is marketed and structured, it's like, we're going to sell you this. You have to have this latest camera and this latest this and this latest that.
Yeah.
I shot all the footage for Inside the Edit on a 5D Mark II.
I saw that. That's right. Yeah.
Nothing, and it's just like it's the story and the structure that keeps people engaged and keeps millions of people. If you got watching, you're making something for 10 million people. Doesn't matter what it's shot on. It has no matter at all what it's shot on. It's how you structure the story, how you tell the story. What music you use, the pace and timing. A masterful filmmaker will design a narrative and dramatic roller coaster, and that's not available in any kind of manual, or whether you're not going to tell the difference between 4K and 6K. All that stuff is pointless. You could shoot it on your iPhone.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
The story,
I know.
I think in drama it's different. I think in drama there's a whole kind of aesthetic quality that's slightly different, maybe not as applicable, but with documentaries it's
Amen, brother, because we speak the same language, Paddy. It's you and I have actually some similar backgrounds in that, we were kind of brought up in the industry via editing. And then from there, we branched off into doing some camera work and then, doing some directing work through our companies. And interestingly enough, it seems like, this philosophy and understanding and knowing how to do these other disciplines, it's very much what you're teaching with Inside the Edit. You're not teaching people to just be editors. You're teaching people to be better filmmakers, to be better shooters, to be better directors, to be better production managers. I'm so in alignment with this, Paddy. You and I have lived this. Why was this important for you to have this as a philosophy for Inside the Edit? And how are you incorporating it?
I always say, you want to be a better director, learn how to edit. If you want to be a better camera operator, learn how to edit. As an editor, having done 15 years straight of straight editing, I don't know how many thousands of hours of raw footage I watched, or any editor watched, like you watched, or any of my colleagues, any of my peers. And what happens is you store up this huge database of that's not going to work, that's good, that's bad, like that, don't like that, da, 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 da. So when you actually come time to pick up a camera, like I remember the first time I picked up the camera, and after you've learned exposure and shutter speed and all that kind of stuff, that takes you a couple of hours to learn. And I just took my new 5D down the park. I just shot some moving image. I followed, my very good friend of mine, very old friend, is a very senior and well-established DOP over here. He shoots a lot of big commercials, and he said the best way to get the focus is to just basically go and sit next to a motorway and practice again and again and again, focusing in on trying to get sharp number plates on moving cars.
Yeah, right.
Boom. And you just get a reflex for it. And you do this for a couple of days. And then literally, as soon as I sort of got the logistics of the camera, like I've never shot before, I've been in edit suite 15 years. As soon as you got that, and I picked that up in a couple of days, it was just natural. It was like, wide, medium, close, bang, left, right. When someone's talking, a good doc or entertainment or reality camera operator will have one ear open for the director and one ear and looking down the lens, looking at what the person's saying, so they know when to reveal left, reveal right, all that kind of stuff. So you get all that stuff as an editor. So having done 15 years of that, it was very, very easy to just pick up a camera and go boom. And this is what we teach a lot at Inside the Edit. It's like, look, a very large percentage of our members, we've got members in 50 countries around the world now, which is really awesome. And so many of them, and a lot of them are in-house at big broadcasters. We work with a lot of the big broadcasters as well who use us as their staff, but a lot of them are videographers and self-shooting documentary filmmakers. The one-man band is possible now. It wasn't possible back when we were starting. When it was 50 grand for a Beta SP camera, and $100 grand for now you've got this amazing kit. There's been a democratization of the technology, but the downside of that is that people think that they read a manual and memorize it and pass an exam for memorizing a manual, and they think they're a cinematographer or an editor, or it's like, no, it's a craft. There's a whole new thing around. If you really want to know a subject, people have told me this before I did Inside the Edit. You really want to know a subject inside out, teach it.
Yeah, that's so true.
Questions you never even thought about it, and this is another thing about.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at the process of how long. Look at the painstaking process of writing the course and writing Inside the Edit. Let's talk about that. Look how long that took you.
Yeah, so that took me a good couple of years, actually. I mean, the thing about it is that I looked around. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there.
No, it's great.
I looked around and I kind of realized that no one was teaching the craft. So I started looking at training centers and what they were teaching. I started looking at film schools and what they were teaching. I started looking at interviewing film school alumni, young kids and stuff like that. Then I started kind of like going out and speaking to mates of mine who were, buddies of mine who were editing feature films, editing Hollywood films, editing big docs, editing, basically, senior editors. And I kind of realized actually it was a shocking situation and it was same with me because I wasn't taught at film school or anything like that. Most editors are self-taught. Yeah. They are taught in isolation by themselves. It takes about 5 to 10 years. And the reason it does that is because they don't talk to anyone. They're in a dark room for their entire lives. And they figure out hundreds and hundreds of these creative techniques by themselves. It's mental. I just thought, hold on, it's crazy. So I spent a long time like speaking to my friends. I'd say, hey man, what would you, if you had a situation like this, blah, 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 what would you do? And they'd go, oh, well, I just put this down there and go, zip, 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 zip. And I'd go, yeah, me too. Now, what would you call that? And they just sort of look at me blankly and go, well, there's no name for that. And I was like, yeah, there is no name, is there? So I went through hundreds of these techniques that we do automatically, instinctively every day as editors. Mm-hmm, and over 2 years, I kind of poured out. And I realized that there was no language to call it, just the basic. There was some really basic language, cutaways and video channels and da-da-da-da-da. And actually, I had to invent a whole new language about a lot of the things that we do every single day as editors that are instinctual. And people say you can't teach it. And the reason they say that is because no one's ever written it down before. That's like saying you can't teach someone to walk or breathe.
Right.
It's like, if that was the case, then, the wheel would never have been invented.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an instinctive art form. It's subjective. When you look at a framed shot, camera work, that's not a nice shot. There's too much light, or there's not enough light. It's underexposed, overexposed. The framing's wrong. It's not so much of a subjective art form. Whereas what we teach in Inside the Edit is like there's a wrong way to do something and structure a scene or edit something, but there's multiple right ways.
That's
of doing
right. Yeah.
So it took me about 2 years to write it all down. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words. The script's like a telephone directory. So and actually at the same time I was shooting, because I wrote about 200 tutorials as part of the course, and then at the same time I was because that's the other thing I always had in a lot of these training centers as well. Like, you teach young people and they're like, oh, I'm certified now on whatever software. How do I build a show reel? And I was like, well, you can't, because no production company in the history of the world has ever
going to give you their footage.
No, it just doesn't happen. They're not going to tell you how the sausage was made. So I went out and actually shot over 2 years while I was writing the course. I shot a full-length observational documentary in London, Paris, and Venice, Italy.
That's right. That's right. And it was the Cities of Dawn, correct?
Cities of Dawn.
Yeah.
So everyone who joins Inside the Edit, whether it's a monthly or an annual or a lifetime, they get complete access to that 35 hours of footage. And we use that in all the tutorials. So we cut scenes, recut scenes, and so I was shooting that at the same time as writing it, and I was actually shooting problems within the footage.
Oh wow!
Because I always say it's really easy to make beautiful footage look great, but that's not what we do every day in broadcast editing. So much of what's really hard is making terrible footage look great.
Yeah,
that's the work. That's what makes you a better editor. If all your footage is beautiful and wonderful and it's well structured and well thought out, you're not going to be a great editor.
Yeah.
Just like a calm sea will never make a good sailor, as they say.
Right.
There will always be situations throughout our career when we're confronted with footage that is either badly shot in some way or has missing content. There are hundreds of reasons why this could happen, and there really is no sense in trying to blame someone on the production. It creates bad feeling and doesn't endear us to our employers. As we discussed at the start of this chapter, we should start looking at these situations as challenges, a battle that we have been forced into, but one which brings out the very best in us. In this set of 4 tutorials, we're going to look at various concepts, techniques, and creative thought processes that will help us in many of the scenarios we'll often find ourselves in. So, let's get started.
So I was shooting all this stuff, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to ask that question, or I'm not going to get that shot, or I'm going to mess up that end shot, or I'm going to, fill in the blank, because these are the type of things
that you're running up against
every single day. Yeah. I mean, I could have shot that. I mean, not saying it's not beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, and there's loads of actuality scenes. There's loads of, because we teach reality and actuality observational documentary as well. Yeah. There's loads of beautiful stuff, but I knew when I had a very specific part of a tutorial, like, I don't know, somewhere in tutorial 9.8 or something like that, I'd go, right, okay, we're going to teach this. So, okay, well, I'm not going to get that reverse shot of it. How would we do that? Yeah. So I would deliberately shoot a flaw within the footage. It was a very long, drawn out process. It was writing. I wrote everything first, and then and then I was shooting the film, and then I just went into production and started structuring them. And then I did a lot of research as well around what everyone else was doing in online training. I mean, no one was teaching the craft. Still, no one is doing any courses in certainly to a professional level. There's some courses you can do, like, if you want to be a good wedding video editor or something like that. I mean, yeah, there's some stuff around that. That's
plenty of stuff on YouTube.
There's no, I mean, we get hundreds of emails going, I've looked everywhere and you are the only people who teach the craft.
Right.
So we don't talk about anything technical. You can do it on any piece of software. You can do it on iMovie if you want. If we don't, we demonstrate on Avid, on Media Composer. I've always loved Media Composer. It's the industry standard, really, if you want a serious career in editing. But we don't talk about it at all. You can, we have so many of our members are like Premiere Pro or Final Cut, or it doesn't matter. The timeline's a timeline in my mind. It's a tool. It's like, nice. I'm going to build a house. Do you want this type of hammer or that type of hammer? Yeah. It's like, it's the art form. That's what we teach, and that's what's going to get you employed. That's what's going to make you a better filmmaker. Is de-emphasizing. It's not 90% technical and 10% craft. It's the other way around. But you read any kind of video magazine or watching, they'd have you believe it's the other way around because they want you to spend money. You don't need to spend any money.
These are the raw emotions that people display separate from what they say. As we talk about a lot in the tutorials, there's a whole layer of communication underneath someone's speech. The general consensus in modern psychology is that around 80% of communication is non-verbal. And understanding everything from the tiniest micro-expression on a character's face to an energy shift in the middle of the scene makes us better editors.
The craft, it's a major part. It's not getting taught anywhere, and that's what we do. That's our USP. That's, we're the only people in the world who do that. But there's also a whole load of other kind of talents that you need as an editor, or indeed as a filmmaker, that will get you employed again and again and again. So we actually developed a secondary stream of content, which we launched recently, called Outside the Edit.
Outside the Edit, right.
So it's like all the things you can do to make yourself more employable, more, the 100 different things. Editing is all about, I don't know who said it, but, I think it was in one of those documentaries about editing I saw, I think like the Cutting Edge documentary, which is amazing. If someone hasn't seen that, if you haven't seen that, go and watch it.
I love it.
Brilliant. And someone said, if there was no more editing, we'd all go and work in the UN. We're all diplomats. So, you have quite a kind of psychological chameleon. Every director is completely different. You have to get the best out of them without them feeling manipulated or anything like that. So we developed a whole kind of secondary stream of things that are really, really useful about navigating the murky waters of freelance filmmaking, whether you're an editor or anything. But things like, how do you work with really difficult directors? We had a big episode on that, which went down really well.
We've talked about that here on the program. That's great.
Yeah. Some of the psychological. It's basically professional edit psychology. So that's a new thing that we teach, which is going down really, really well.
Do you think I would be able to get Donald Trump to sign up for your course? Because I feel like there are some things that he might be able to use with the international community from here forth.
He needs an editor. He needs a good editor.
Yes.
A really good editor. I don't think there's an editor on planet Earth that would be as good as what he needed.
That's right.
That goes way beyond my abilities and probably Walter Murch's. So,
I'm really glad that you brought up outside the edit, because, like I said, I'd had a couple of listeners who had recently emailed me and talked in particular about your course. And in fact, one of the guys his name is Dean, and he's based out of the UK himself, and he had some questions about, how does one go about, getting their first jobs? How does one go about doing editing as a career? And I think your outside the edit is going to answer a bit of that. So I'm really excited to hear that that's part of Inside the Edit, your program.
Yeah, absolutely. We got tons of new episodes planned that will deal with all of this type of stuff. So we're really excited about it, and I think it's an essential component to designing your career as an editor. I mean, I was told very, very early on that you can be the greatest artist around. You can be amazing. But if you're an absolute nightmare to work with, no one's going to work with you. A director would rather work with someone who's average and really cool than someone who's amazing and who's an absolute nightmare.
Absolutely.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Outside the Edit. So, what is outside the edit? Well, as you know, our tutorials are all about all the hundreds of techniques and skills and concepts and theories that are based on craft. But there are tons and tons of things that we can do when we're not inside the edit, or when we're not in an edit suite or talking with a director, that can really, really help us in becoming a better editor. What we're talking about is a secondary set of skills that we can use to build and sustain a successful career in editing.
Pat, if you could walk me through the course. What all does it entail? What do you receive if you sign up for the course? What's the work involved, and how long does a course take, and what are the costs involved?
Yeah, sure. So we operate a bit like lynda.com or a lot of online courses. Is we operate, we've got kind of 3 tiers of membership dependent on your budget. We have a monthly, which is about £40, $39.95, which is what, I don't know what the dollar is at the moment.
It's basically $50 US.
$50 a month. And then we have an annual, so you get 12 months for the price of 10, so it's about £400, £399. So that's what,
$500. Yeah.
And then you have a lifetime, so that's £999. So when you join, what we've done is it's basically like, it's not like if you were to join any other sort of filmmaking course or software-based course or anything like that. It's very easy to jump in and go, I'm learning After Effects. I need to know what that button is. So I go all the way through the course and go, bing, tutorial 62 in the After Effects course. I know what that button does now. Thank you very much. Editing is like a language. It's like you're doing, Rosetta Stone or, any of those big online languages things. You wouldn't really go in and, go straight to chapter 5. Because, if you went straight to chapter 5 in a French course or an Italian course or Chinese course, you wouldn't know what anyone was talking about.
Yeah.
What we do is we've tried to replicate every single thing that you get in an edit suite. So the day you join is very simple. We've made the whole process very, very simple. You can join a monthly, annual, or lifetime. As soon as you join, you get your login details emailed to you, and you go in and you get complete access to each of the chapters. We add new stuff all the time, but I'll get to that in a minute. You get 35 hours of footage, which you can download straight away. You get director's notes, footage logs, interview transcripts, all the stuff that you get, that first day when you walk into a
That's
pro
right.
edit.
Right.
You get all
here's your
these
transcripts, here's the footage, go to it.
Here's all these script outlines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So everything you get. We also partnered with the biggest music library in the world as well, Universal Production Music.
Right.
So you get 100 tracks to use, music tracks, really beautiful
Incredible
music tracks. So you just start watching. Now at the end of each tutorial, some of the tutorials are like 5 minutes long, some of them are 90 minutes long, depending on the complexity of what we're talking about. And at the end of each tutorial, you're set a creative task. So you basically go off, or at least one creative task. Sometimes there's 2, 3, or 4. You go off and you start building, rough sync pools, of people talking, or B-roll selections, or whatever, as you progress through the course, as it gets more and more complex, with the footage and the music that we've provided. And this footage and music, you're free to use it because we own the copyright. You're free to use it to attract clients on your Vimeo channels, on your YouTube channels, on your show
reel. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can go off and do whatever you want with it for commercial usage.
Right.
Which is another kind of unprecedented thing that we try to do. So so you go through the course. You start over the course of the course. You're building like a 60 to 90 minute documentary, essentially.
Okay.
And you will build a prime time level show. So you progress and you start with the very, very basics. And all you need is a very, very rudimentary knowledge of editing. If you can load a clip from whatever software you're working in, you can load a clip into the viewer monitor, mark an in and an out point, and then put it down on the timeline, you're ready. That's it. But you don't need any, like I say, because that's about all I can do in the technical side of any software. That's all you need to know. So yeah, gradually, as you go through the course, you get to start putting together sync pools, people talking, the structure or the spine of every scene. And then you start your B-roll. Then we start talking about putting them together, how you create, arcs, miniature arcs, arcs across scenes and stuff like that. And, all the kind of complexities of like pace and timing and how do you got actuality and scoring and stuff like that. So each chapter, like I said, there's 20 chapters. I think we're just about to start chapter 12 at the moment. So we've got about 80 or 90 tutorials up there. We add all the time, and you just gradually get more and more proficient and quicker and quicker and quicker about all doing these, we want all these creative thought processes to become reflexive. That's our basic thing. Is that you're creating a huge database of creative techniques, stylization principles, and stuff like that, all of which, I'd say 99% of which have never been written down before. There's no name for them. So this really puts you in the kind of higher echelons of editing, but also, if you're a self-shooter, if you're a videographer, if you're a one-man band, one woman band, your shooting ratios are going to go down. It means your budget can stretch a lot further.
Yeah.
I think it's Da Vinci or someone said, you never finish a work of art, you just hand it over in the time allowed.
Right.
I don't need to say that word for word, but if you're doing what usually takes 4 or 5 hours in 1 hour, you've got a choice. You can duplicate your budget to go and work on another film, and shoot 2 films instead of 1, or you save money in a number of different ways. You don't need less storage, but also you could possibly shoot more scenes.
That's right. That's right. And all of this is music to a documentary filmmaker's ears. Most of us who, we don't have someone who's financing our documentaries with a lot of money. And so that is absolutely massive important and a big boon to Inside the Edit, your course. So, Paddy, what is the best way for listeners of the documentary life to get involved and to sign up for your course with Inside the Edit?
Well, basically, it's pretty simple. Come and look at us on insidetheedit.com. We've got some demo tutorials, a whole load of in-depth stuff about, what the course is about and stuff like that. You can use a promo code as well specifically for listening to this podcast, MyDocLife, MYDOCLIFE, and you'll be able to get a 25% discount off all of our memberships, monthly, annual, or lifetime.
Fantastic.
Just to state that the monthly would be the first month only, because we do get a few emails about that.
I'll bet. So it's a 25% discount on the first month if you go monthly. However, if you opt to pay for the year up front or a lifetime, it's 25% off that entire fee.
Absolutely, which is obviously the more you go up, it's a more of a percentage off.
I have never seen anything like this. I have never seen an online course or any curriculum like this when it comes to post-production, when it comes to editing. And, I wish that this had existed even 10, 15 years, 20 years ago. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I've never seen anything like this. It's exciting what you're doing with Inside the Edit. Again, as a listener, if you want to take advantage of the 25% discount, simply use the promo code MyDocLife, all in caps. And of course, I'll put a link up in the show notes for this program, or you can probably just go straight to Paddy's website, insidetheedit.com, and check out more about his course there, and you can, of course, sign up there. Paddy Bird, this has been an absolutely amazing, thrilling, insightful, lovely conversation. I can't wait to get this out into the world. Like I said, we have a number of doc filmmakers out there who have been asking about good editing content, and it doesn't get any better than this conversation. So thank you for that, Paddy.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. I really appreciate you asking me to come on the podcast, and I've had a lot of fun. What you do is amazing, so keep up the amazing work, mate. It's phenomenal. This community that you've grown is brilliant, and I feel privileged to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, man. Don't forget, if you're interested in a guide to help you navigate the fundamental aspects of doc filmmaking, the things that every doc filmmaker should know, then get our free doc filmmaking course, The Documentary Filmmaker's Essential Checklist, by going to thedocumentarylife.com/courses. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next episode. Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.